Using a National Geographic map, we looked just north of Seoul for a convenient dividing line, but could not find a natural geographical line. We saw instead the 38th parallel and decided to recommend that. Our commanders accepted it without too much haggling, and surprisingly, so did the Soviets. August 14th, 1945, the same day the Japanese surrendered, ending World War II, Americans Dean Rusk and Charles Bonesteel chose the latitude of 38 degrees north of the equator for the temporary dividing line of Korea. Korea had been under the iron fist rule of Japan since 1910, following the Russo-Japanese War, when the Treaty of Portsmouth was signed, giving Japan authority over the Korean peninsula. In 1945, after being freed from Japan, Korea was left with no government. The Soviet Union saw this as an opportunity to reclaim Korea and marched in from the north. The United States of America, needing to make a quick decision, came to the Soviets with an idea of the temporary split of Korea. The temporary split along the 38th parallel would give the two superpowers time to decide on a government to reunite Korea, but this compromise did not work. The temporary division of Korea along the 38th parallel escalated the Cold War, led to the Korean War, and permanently divided Korea to this day. The tension between the US and USSR began after World War II, when these two new world superpowers were formed. These two nations were allies during World War II, but when this conflict ended, another began. The two nations had different ideas of how government should be run, US believing in capitalism, and USSR believing in communism. Instead of fighting each other head-on, the two superpowers gave money and artillery to smaller countries to fight their war for them. Korea was one of these countries that was used in the Cold War as a strategic battleground in Asia. The USSR controlled North Korea, which gave North Korea the idea that communism was a better way of life. The USA, controlling South Korea, instilled the idea of capitalism. Because the two countries believed in different types of government, it made it hard for them to agree on a central government for Korea. Korea might have been reunited if it weren't for the Cold War, but because the dispute between the US and USSR, Korea ended up going to war instead. The Korean War started on June 25, 1950, when the North Korean army marched over the 38th parallel in support of their government's claim of controlling all of Korea. North Korean troops had taken over most of Korea when the US finally arrived with help. "I will defend Korea as I would my own country, just as I would California." The US Army flanked the attacking North Korean troops. When it looked like Korea would be under US control, the Chinese Army came to North Korea's aid. After many more battles and skirmishes, the border ended up quite the same as it had started off. Kim Il-sung, the eternal president of North Korea, also known as Democratic People's Republic of Korea, ruled from its creation in 1948 to his death in 1994. He was determined to rule a united Korea. The Korean War started over the argument about the 38th parallel, but ended up causing more tension between the US and the Soviets, and millions of deaths in Korea, creating a permanent scar for the country. Today, North and South Korea are still divided and at war because the dispute never officially ended. Although the Korean War fighting ceased when both sides signed an armistice agreement on July 27, 1953 at the demilitarized zone, the two countries still believe they are the rightful rulers of Korea. Even now, 6 decades later, the demilitarized zone, DMZ, remains one of the most heavily armed and fortified borders in the world. Present-day South Korea is much like America, a capitalist economy and technological power, while North Korea is still a very strict dictatorship and a heavily militarized nation, whose citizens are either loyal or live in fear. North Korea has been asserting their power worldwide. In recent news, there has been many verbal threats about nuclear warfare between the US and North Korea. Even other countries have chimed in to stop the conflict. We call on all parties to refrain from provoking and threatening each other, whether in words or actions, and not let the situation get to an irreversible and unmanageable stage. Korea's goal to be a unified country after World War II was shattered when the 38th parallel was temporarily created, and controversy continues to this day. The temporary division of Korea at the 38th parallel escalated the Cold War between the US and USSR, led to the conflict of the Korean War, and created a permanently divided Korea. The idea of a communist system was pursued north of the 38th parallel, and a capitalist system was the goal in the South. This not only brought Korea into the Cold War, but also escalated the conflict between the US and USSR. Since the Korean War has never officially ended, and the conflict has not been completely resolved, Korea has remained divided to the present day. The 38th parallel is still the dividing line between the two countries. The United States' continued support of South Korea has fueled the tension between the US and North Korea. With the recent news around North Korea's military aggression, it's important for people to know where this conflict arose from. The Korean War is sometimes referred to as the Forgotten War because it didn't get as much attention as World War II or Vietnam. In order to find a compromise in the future, it is important to understand the origins of this conflict.